The Interstellar Accord for Pre-Contact Species Evaluation had, over the course of 17,000 years, developed what it considered a foolproof system for determining whether a primitive civilization deserved the dubious honor of knowing they weren't alone in the universe. The system involved observation, documentation, and most importantly, testing. Because nothing says welcome to the cosmic neighborhood quite like kidnapping a handful of natives and dropping them in progressively horrible situations to see if they'd curl up and die or do something mildly interesting. The bureaucracy behind this operation was exactly as entertaining as one might expect. 47 different species sat on the evaluation committees, each with their own forms, protocols, and deeply held opinions about what constituted acceptable behavior for aspiring spacefaring races. The Vrelnoth insisted on mathematical problem-solving. The Kesari demanded artistic expression. The Zimkara, who communicated through scent and had no concept of visual art, found the Kesari's requirements idiotic, but went along with it because committee meetings were already long enough without starting that argument again. Earth, that little blue-green marble spinning in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy, had been on the watch list for approximately 200 years. Long enough for the evaluation team to determine that yes, humans had discovered radio waves, and yes, they were definitely going to figure out faster-than-light travel eventually, probably right after they finished arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. The question wasn't whether to make contact. The question was whether humanity would pass the traditional tests or do something spectacularly stupid that would require another 300 years of observation. The trial selected for Earth fell under Category 7, Survival under Adverse Natural Conditions. Specifically, the jungle variant, which had a lovely track record of separating species who could cooperate and adapt from species who would eat each other within 48 hours. The testing committee, composed of a Vrelnoth named Krix Cha, a Kesari called Melodious Ascending Dawn, and a human-sized beetle creature from Thargon, who went by clicking sound number 47, had prepared a remote section of what humans called the Amazon rainforest. The parameters were standard. 5 subjects, randomly selected from the general population. Minimal supplies, basic clothing, a single knife, 1 length of rope, and a water container per person. Observation period of 30 standard days. Success criteria included establishing shelter, securing food and water, avoiding death, and demonstrating social cohesion. Approximately 63% of tested species managed this. Another 20% died in various horrible ways. The remaining 17% did something so bizarre that it broke the rating system, which is why there was a special addendum in the regulations about the Plixnor, who had achieved transcendence on day 12 and refused to come back down. Nobody expected humans to transcend. The file on humanity suggested they were resourceful but violent, creative but chaotic, and possessed an unusual relationship with their own mortality that manifested as either extreme caution or weaponized stupidity, depending on the individual. Krix Cha reviewed the selected subjects one final time before transport. Subject 1, structural engineer, female, age 34, recently divorced, possessed an online search history that was 70% home improvement videos and 30% existential crisis. Subject 2, botanist, male, age 41, specialized in tropical ecosystems, had been rejected from 11 academic positions for excessive enthusiasm. Subject 3, former military, female, age 29, tactical specialist, discharged honorably, currently worked as a consultant, teaching corporate executives how to play paintball. Subject 4, Cultural anthropologist, male, age 52, had lived with 17 different indigenous communities, spoke 9 languages, possibly going through a midlife crisis based on his recent purchase of a very expensive motorcycle. Subject 5, wilderness guide, non-binary, age 26, made a living taking rich people camping and secretly judging them, maintained a blog called Humans Are Bad at Nature. The selection algorithm had done its job. Diverse skill sets, varied backgrounds, no prior connections. The system predicted a 47% chance of success with a 12% margin of error. The system, as it turned out, had dramatically underestimated several key variables. Transport occurred during each subject's sleep cycle. Standard procedure: wake up in a jungle clearing, mild confusion, eventual acceptance of bizarre circumstances, begin survival protocol. Krix-Cha settled into the observation station 300 meters above the canopy, adjusting the holographic displays. Melodious ascending dawn hummed something that translated roughly to "This should be adequately entertaining." Clicking sound number 47 clicked 47 times, which meant either agreement or hunger. The translation software had never quite figured that out. The 5 humans woke simultaneously, programmed disorientation wearing off within minutes. The engineer sat up first, looked around, and said something that the translator rendered as well: "This is aggressively weird." The others stirred. Initial confusion gave way to introductions. Names were exchanged. The engineer went by Mac. The botanist answered to River. The tactical specialist introduced herself as Dex. The anthropologist offered Omar, and the wilderness guide shrugged and said Val while already examining the surrounding vegetation. Standard opening. The committee relaxed. This would proceed normally. Then Mac stood up, walked to the nearest tree, knocked on it with her knuckles, looked up at the canopy approximately 40 meters overhead, and announced, "We could build something absolutely incredible here." Krix-Cha's sensor stalks twitched. That wasn't typical survivor dialogue. Typical survivor dialogue involved panic, despair, or aggressive optimism about rubbing sticks together. River joined her, running his hands over the bark. Dipteryx alata, unless I'm mistaken. Excellent structural integrity. And look at the canopy density, natural rain protection with minimal modification needed. Hold on, Dex said, standing and brushing dirt from her clothes. Before we start planning construction projects, maybe we should discuss water, food, and the fact that we've apparently been abducted by aliens or drugged by a reality show. Either way, lawsuits. Omar was already sketching in the dirt with a stick. The anthropological implications are fascinating, but pragmatically speaking, if we're going to be here for an unknown duration, we should establish not just survival protocols, but sustainable systems. Val, what's the baseline hostility level of this environment? Val had wandered to the clearing's edge, examining plants with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly which vegetation would kill you and how quickly. High humidity, here running water to the east. Bug activity suggests we're not at the top of the food chain. Standard jungle, probably South American based on the species composition. We've got options, but they're all going to involve work. Then we should start now, Max said. And the frightening thing was that nobody disagreed. Up in the observation station, Krix-Cha reviewed the data feed 3 times, convinced the translation software had malfunctioned. They're planning construction. They've been conscious for 7 minutes. Perhaps they haven't fully processed their situation. Melodious ascending dawn suggested, color patterns shifting to indicate curiosity. Shock manifests differently across species. Clicking sound number 47 clicked 12 times. Skeptical. Day 1 proceeded in a manner that broke roughly 14 different predictive models. Normal species spent the first day establishing basic shelter, usually a lean-to or debris hut, and locating water. These humans located water within the first hour. River identified 6 edible plant species within the second hour, and by hour 3, Mac had organized what she called a planning committee. They didn't build a lean-to. They surveyed 20 different trees, with Mac explaining something about load-bearing capacity and distributed weight systems, while River provided information about which trees would tolerate having structures built around them. Dex scouted a perimeter, returning with notes about sightlines and approach vectors. Omar interviewed each person about their skills, backgrounds and comfort levels with various tasks, creating what he called a social cohesion map. Val, meanwhile, had identified 3 different water sources, mapped edible plants in a 100-meter radius, and begun teaching everyone which insects were protein and which were death. By sunset, they'd marked 17 trees with scratches, indicating some kind of planned layout. They'd built a small fire using a bow drill that Val assembled in approximately 4 minutes. They'd eaten a meal of palm hearts, Brazil nuts, and some kind of root vegetable that River promised wouldn't kill them, probably. And they'd started arguing about architecture. 2 levels minimum, Mac insisted, drawing diagrams in the dirt near the fire. Ground level stays clear except for storage. We live in the canopy where it's safer and drier. 3 levels, Dex countered. Ground for storage and traps, mid-level for living, upper level for observation and defense. Defense against what? Omar asked. We don't know the threat parameters. Exactly, Dex said. Which means we plan for everything. Krixchar filed the first special notation in the report. Subject species displaying unusually complex organizational behavior. Possible collective intelligence manifestation. Recommend continued observation. Week 1 was when the evaluation committee started using phrases like highly irregular and unprecedented deviation from baseline. The humans built a treehouse. Except calling it a treehouse was like calling a supernova a nightlight. They constructed a multi-level dwelling that utilized 7 different trees, connected by rope bridges that Mac somehow engineered to handle weight loads that shouldn't have been possible with their limited materials. River had discovered several vine species that, when properly treated, produced fibers stronger than the synthetic rope they'd been provided. Dex designed the whole thing like a fortress, with sightlines, multiple escape routes, and what she called tactical advantages that made Krixchar deeply uncomfortable. The structure incorporated living trees as support columns, with platforms that wrapped around trunks without damaging the bark. River had been very insistent about that, explaining something about sustainable interaction with ecosystems, while Mac nodded and adjusted her designs. They'd created a pulley system for hauling materials, rocks, wood, water containers up to the platforms. They'd built a rainwater collection system using broad leaves and hollowed bamboo that fed into elevated storage containers. And they were just getting started. This exceeds the scope of the survival trial, Melodious Ascending Dawn observed, watching the humans weave a roof for their main platform. They're not surviving, they're establishing permanent residence. The parameters state only that they must shelter themselves adequately, Krixchar replied, checking the regulations for the 17th time. There's no upper limit on shelter quality. Clicking sound number 47 clicked 9 times. The clicking sounded concerned. By day 10, the humans had a village. The main dwelling had 3 levels, as Dex had insisted, with separate sleeping quarters for privacy, a communal area for meals and planning, and an upper observation deck that provided 360-degree visibility. They'd constructed 2 smaller satellite platforms in nearby trees, connected by bridges, designated for food storage and what Omar called cultural activities, which apparently meant a space for talking, storytelling, and whatever humans did when they weren't aggressively improving their environment. The botanist had effectively created a vertical garden, identifying edible plants that could be transplanted near their platforms. Hanging baskets made from woven vines contained herbs, tubers, and leafy vegetables. He'd marked dozens of trees in the surrounding area, creating what he called a food forest map that ensured they'd never have to travel far for ingredients. Decks had moved beyond defense into what could only be called tactical engineering. The ground level beneath their village contained traps, not simple snares or pits, but layered defensive systems that included tripwires connected to alarm mechanisms, deadfalls designed to deter large predators, and several devices that looked suspiciously like they'd been inspired by military engineering. She'd also established patrol routes, guard schedules, and something she called threat response protocols that seemed excessive for a 30-day survival trial. Unless, of course, the humans weren't treating this as temporary. Week 2 began with Val teaching a workshop on local fauna. The wilderness guide had become the group's primary hunter, using traps and a bow they'd constructed from flexible wood and vine fiber. But more importantly, Val had started documenting everything. A journal made from bark pages and charcoal ink contained detailed notes about animal behavior, plant locations, weather patterns, and sustainable harvesting techniques. "We should assume we're here long term," Val announced during a morning meeting on the main platform. "Even if we're rescued or released, we should build something that could support us indefinitely." Nobody questioned this logic. If anything, it seemed to energize them. Mac expanded the village, adding a 4th satellite platform designated for tool-making and maintenance. Omar established what he called a cultural center in one of the communal spaces, complete with wall decorations made from colored clay and crushed plant materials. The anthropologist had appointed himself the keeper of stories, spending evenings collecting everyone's backgrounds, jokes, and observations, weaving them into a shared narrative. "Every society needs culture," Omar explained when Dex questioned the necessity of decorating their walls. "We're not just surviving, we're living. There's a difference." River, meanwhile, had moved beyond gardening into something closer to ecosystem engineering. He'd identified nutrient-poor areas and started composting systems. He'd mapped water flow during rain events and designed drainage that prevented erosion around their trees. He'd even started cultivating medicinal plants, creating what he called their pharmacy platform. The evaluation committee held an emergency meeting. "They've exceeded every benchmark for successful completion," Crixture reported, sensory stalks drooping with exhaustion. Shelter, food security, water access, social cohesion, threat mitigation. They've achieved all primary objectives and approximately 47 secondary objectives that aren't even part of the official criteria. "So we pass them and initiate contact?" Melodious Ascending Dawn asked. "That's the problem," Crixture said, pulling up video feeds from the past 14 days. "Look at their behavior patterns. They show no interest in rescue, no attempts to signal for help, no discussion of return to their previous civilization. They're building as though they plan to stay permanently." On screen, the humans were constructing something new. A bridge, longer than the others, extending from their village toward a massive tree, approximately 50 meters away. "They're expanding." Clicking sound number 47 clicked, the translation software adding a note of disbelief. Week 3 was when the hidden kingdom emerged. The humans had discovered that their village, when viewed from above, blended almost perfectly with the natural canopy. 50 meters up, surrounded by dense foliage, their platforms and bridges became nearly invisible. They'd enhanced this accidentally discovered camouflage deliberately, encouraging certain vine species to grow across their structures, adding leafy coverings that served double duty as shade and concealment. Dex had been particularly pleased by this development, immediately expanding her defensive systems. The ground level now contained a maze of carefully marked trails, safe paths that the humans knew by heart, surrounded by areas rigged with noise traps that would alert them to any large animals or theoretical intruders. She'd built several hidden supply caches in the surrounding jungle, stocked with food, water and tools, in case we need to evacuate or establish a secondary position. The tactical specialist was treating this survival trial like a military operation, and the others had simply accepted this as reasonable planning. The new platform they'd been building connected to what Omar called the Great Tree, a massive specimen that dwarfed even the large trees supporting their main village. Mac had spent 3 days studying it, taking measurements, testing the wood, and consulting with River about its health and stability. "This could be our capital building," she'd said, which was when the evaluation committee realized the humans had mentally graduated from village to nation-state. The Great Tree platform became their masterpiece. Larger than the others, positioned at a dizzying height, it featured a central meeting hall with a roof so cleverly constructed that rain rolled off in channels, feeding directly into their water system. The walls were woven from treated vines and bamboo, providing protection from wind while allowing airflow. Windows cut into the weaving offered panoramic views of the jungle canopy. Omar decorated it extensively. The walls featured maps of their territory, because yes, they'd claimed territory, approximately 2 square kilometers of jungle that they now considered theirs. Art made from flowers, crushed minerals, and plant dyes covered the spaces between maps. In one corner, a calendar scratched into wood marked the passage of days, with notations about weather, food harvests, and something called cultural milestones. "What's a cultural milestone?" Dex had asked. "Day 7, we named the village," Omar explained. Day 12, River successfully cultivated the first generation of transplanted crops. Day 16, we held our first communal feast. These things matter. They're what transform a survival camp into a society. They'd named the village. The translation software had difficulty with the word they'd chosen, something that meant both sanctuary and really nice tree place, but the intent was clear. This wasn't temporary shelter. This was home. The underground developments were somehow even more elaborate. Humans, it turned out, weren't content with just conquering the vertical space. They'd excavated several chambers beneath their main village, using clever drainage systems to prevent flooding. These underground spaces served as cold storage for food, protecting it from heat and animals. They'd also created what Val called a root cellar, storing tubers and other vegetables in conditions that extended their shelf life. The waste management system was perhaps the most disturbing evidence of long-term planning. They'd established composting areas, carefully positioned downwind and distant from their living spaces, where organic waste broke down into fertilizer for River's gardens. They dug a latrine system with proper drainage, treating sanitation with the seriousness of people who planned to be here for months or years. "This violates the spirit of the trial," Melodious Ascending Dawn insisted during an evaluation committee meeting. "They're supposed to survive, not colonize." Crixture reviewed the regulations again. The parameters specify survival under adverse natural conditions. They're surviving. That their methods are more sophisticated than expected doesn't constitute a violation. They've built a civilization. The Kasari's color patterns flashed irritated reds and oranges. In 3 weeks. Technically, Crixie said slowly, they've built infrastructure for a civilization. The civilization itself is still just 5 people. 5 people who show no intention of leaving. Clicking sound number 47, clicked 14 times rapidly. Extremely concerned. Week 4 began with what Omar called cultural consolidation. The anthropologist had been documenting everything in his bark journal, a chronicle that was becoming impressively thick. He'd recorded recipes that Val and River had developed using local ingredients. He'd written down the technical specifications that Mac rattled off about weight distribution and structural integrity. He'd documented Dex's tactical systems, creating detailed maps of trap locations and defensive positions. More significantly, he'd started recording stories. Every evening, as the 5 humans gathered in their main hall for dinner, Omar would ask questions. Where were they from? What did they miss? What did they want to build next? The conversations flowed, sometimes sad, sometimes hilarious, always human in a way that was difficult to quantify but impossible to miss. They'd developed traditions. A morning ritual where everyone checked in about their plans for the day. An afternoon break where they'd gather at the highest platform to, as Val put it, appreciate the view and remember that we're small mammals who somehow ended up living in the sky. Evening meals were communal and mandatory, with everyone contributing to both food preparation and cleanup. They'd created games, competitions for who could identify the most bird species in a day, challenges to see who could cross their rope bridges fastest. Something called jungle trivia, where they'd quiz each other on plant identification, animal behavior, and increasingly absurd hypothetical scenarios. If you could only eat one thing from this jungle for the rest of your life, what would it be, and why is your answer wrong? Had apparently sparked a 2-hour debate. Mac had started drawing plans for additional structures, a workshop platform with better lighting for detailed tool work, a greenhouse concept that would allow them to cultivate more delicate plants. Something she called a recreational facility, which involved a natural spring they'd found 200 meters from their village, and plans to create a bathing area with temperature-controlled pools. They were planning amenities, luxuries, improvements to quality of life that went far beyond survival. We should probably be concerned about this, Crixie observed, watching Mac gesture enthusiastically while explaining her greenhouse concept to River. Should we intervene? Melodious Ascending Dawn asked. Based on what grounds? They're not in danger. They're thriving. They've exceeded every metric for success. They're just overachieving. Clicking sound number 47 clicked 3 times. The translation software suggested this meant humans, as though that single word explained everything. The final week of the trial brought the moment the evaluation committee had been dreading. On day 27, the humans held a formal meeting in their great tree hall. All 5 gathered around a woven mat that served as their conference table, looking unusually serious. We should discuss exit strategy, Dex said, and Crixie's sensory stalks perked up. Finally, they were acknowledging the temporary nature of their situation. Agreed, Max said. If we're staying long-term, we need to plan for eventual contact with the outside world. The observation station fell silent. Staying. Melodious Ascending Dawn's color patterns flickered confused blues and purples. Omar nodded, making notes in his journal. We need to establish protocols for introducing our society to others. Trade relationships, diplomatic frameworks, that sort of thing. Our crops should be mature enough for trading in another month, River added. And I've been working on cultivating some of the rarer medicinal plants. Those could be valuable. Val pulled out their maps. I've been thinking about expansion. There's excellent territory to the west, near that waterfall. We could establish a secondary settlement, start building a network of villages. We're getting ahead of ourselves, Dex said, but she was smiling. First we finish fortifying our current position. Then we explore expansion options. So we're in agreement. Mac looked around the circle. We're staying. 4 heads nodded. Then let's talk about the practical considerations, Omar said. Eventually someone will come looking for us. Governments, search parties, possibly the entities responsible for bringing us here. We need a unified position on whether we want to be found. The camouflage helps, Dex observed. We're effectively invisible from the air. Ground search would be difficult in this terrain. We could avoid detection for years if we wanted to. Do we want to? River asked. The question hung in the humid air. 5 humans, 3 weeks into a 30-day survival trial, seriously discussing whether they wanted to remain hidden in the jungle indefinitely. I mean, Mac said slowly, we've built something pretty incredible here. Running water, sustainable food, secure shelter, and nobody's trying to sell us car insurance or ask us about our student loans. No traffic, Val added. No deadlines, River said. No performance reviews, Dex contributed. No existential dread about whether we're contributing meaningfully to society, because we've literally built a society from scratch, and it's right here, Omar finished. They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating their weird, beautiful, impossible situation. So we're really doing this? Mac asked. We're already doing it, Dex pointed out. The question is whether we keep doing it. I vote yes, River said immediately. Seconded, Val added. This is insane, Mac said. I love it. Yes. The anthropological implications alone are worth staying, Omar agreed. Plus, I really like our calendar system. Dex laughed. Then it's settled. We're officially founding a jungle kingdom. All in favor. 5 hands rose. In the observation station, Crixture made a sound that the translation software couldn't quite process, but that probably meant something like, I need a drink. The evaluation committee's final report took 3 days to compile and went through 7 drafts. The conclusion was simultaneously simple and completely inadequate. Humans pass all survival trial criteria. Recommend approval for contact. But the appendices told the real story. 47 pages of documentation about unprecedented construction, social organization, resource management, and tactical planning. Extensive notes about humans' apparent inability to do anything halfway, their tendency to treat temporary situations as permanent opportunities, and their disturbing comfort with establishing sovereignty over terrain they'd occupied for less than a month. Clicking sound number 47 had included a special notation, translated roughly as, "This species doesn't survive, it conquers. Recommend monitoring with extreme prejudice." On day 30, the evaluation committee materialized in the jungle clearing where they'd originally deposited the 5 humans. The clearing was empty. Unsurprising, given that the humans were currently 50 meters above them, invisible in the canopy, probably eating fresh vegetables from their garden and discussing expansion plans. Crixture activated the communication system. Human subjects, this is the Interstellar Accord for Pre-Contact Species Evaluation. Your trial period has concluded. You have passed all requirements. Please descend for debriefing and return transport. Silence from the canopy. Humans, please acknowledge. More silence. Then, faintly, the sound of conversation. Several minutes passed. Finally, a rope ladder dropped from somewhere overhead, and 5 humans climbed down. They looked healthy. More than healthy, they looked fantastic. Tanned, fit, wearing clothes they'd apparently woven themselves, decorated with plant dye patterns. Mac spoke first. "So, about that return transport. We'd like to formally decline." Decline. Melodious ascending dawn's color patterns went white. Shocked. "We've established permanent residence," Omar explained, holding up his journal. "I've documented everything according to anthropological standards. We're claiming this territory under, we're not actually sure which laws apply, but we're claiming it anyway." "You can't just claim territory," Krixcha said. "This planet has existing governance structures." "Counterpoint," Dex said. "You abducted us and dropped us in a jungle. We built a civilization. Possession is 9/10 of the law, or so I've heard." "We're not leaving," River added. "Our crops are doing really well." "We took a vote," Val said. "It was unanimous. We like it here." The 3 committee members stared at the 5 humans. The humans stared back, completely serious. "This is highly irregular," Krixcha managed. "Yeah," Mac agreed cheerfully. "But here's the thing, you tested whether we could survive in adverse conditions. We survived. We did great. Gold stars all around. But you never asked if we'd want to return to our previous circumstances once we proved we could survive somewhere new." "You have families," Melodious Ascending Dawn said. "Jobs. Lives." "Had lives," Omar corrected. "Now we have a kingdom. It's small, but it's ours. And honestly, it's the most meaningful thing any of us have done in years." "This will create diplomatic complications," Krixcha warned. "Probably," Dex acknowledged. "On the other hand, we've already established defensive perimeters and supply lines. We're prepared for negotiations." The committee members looked at each other. Clicking sound number 47 clicked 47 times, which definitely meant "I told you so." "We'll need to file special reports," Krixcha said finally. "Multiple special reports. With appendices." "You do that," Mac said. "Meanwhile, we're heading back up. We're building a greenhouse next week, and we need to finalize the plans. You're welcome to visit any time. Bring gifts. We're establishing a trade economy." The 5 humans climbed back up their ladder. Somewhere above, invisible in the green cathedral of the canopy, their hidden kingdom waited. A village built by survival, expanded through ambition, maintained by 5 people who'd looked at a 30-day trial and decided it was actually a real estate opportunity. The evaluation committee dematerialized back to their ship, already dreading the paperwork. 17,000 years of testing pre-contact species, and humanity had managed to break the system in under a month. They hadn't just survived adverse conditions. They'd thrived, built, expanded, and established what they genuinely considered a sovereign nation-state in the trees. The Interstellar Accord would eventually make contact with Earth, officially welcoming humanity to the galactic community. The official reports would mention humanity's resourcefulness, adaptability, and innovation. The unofficial reports, circulated among species who dealt with humans before, contained different warnings. They don't colonize planets. They colonize everywhere. Give them a month and minimal supplies, and they'll build a kingdom. Give them a galaxy, and nowhere will be safe from their architectural ambitions and aggressive domestication of hostile environments. In the Amazon rainforest, 5 humans ate dinner on their main platform, discussing whether they had enough bamboo to build the greenhouse or if they needed to scout new territories. Their village sprawled around them, invisible from the air, a hidden civilization that had emerged from a simple survival trial. They'd named their kingdom. The word, roughly translated, meant "we meant to do that." It was the most human thing imaginable.